Music hold ended.
Hello and welcome to Senator Mike Lee's June Tele-townhall meeting. I'm Emily Benyon and I'll be moderating tonight. Senator, it's good to be with you.
Thank you.
Tonight we'll be taking questions from a few different audiences. If you're on the phone, you can ask a question by pressing *3. If you're watching online via Ustream on Facebook, you can submit a question just below the video. And we'll also be taking questions from an online tool called CrowdHall, which has allowed people to submit questions throughout the week. And if you'd like more information on that, make sure you're following on Senator Lee's Facebook page. Senator Lee, let's get started tonight by talking about what's going on the debate on the Senate floor right now, which is immigration. Can you tell us a little bit about your position and maybe about the amendments that you're proposing?
Sure, I'd love to. Let me start out this discussion by stating my basic position, which is that we are a nation of immigrants. Most of us are descendants of immigrants. Some of us are immigrants ourselves. I hope that we always will be a nation of immigrants because that's what's given our country its richness and its economic power over the years, is that we've had a lot of people who have wanted to come to the United States and make this their home. And the diversity that we've got here, the number of countries that are represented now within the United States from a heritage standpoint is quite staggering, and we've all benefited from that. But in order to make sure that we continue to be a nation of immigrants, we've got to make sure that we have an immigration system that keeps up with changing times. Our current immigration code doesn't do that, and it's woefully inadequate. We have, over the last few years, seen what happens when you have an antiquated immigration system that makes legal immigration really difficult, time-consuming, expensive, and at best uncertain. And in many aspects of our economy, illegal immigration is relatively easy. And so that's part of the reason why we now have 11 million illegal immigrants in this country, is because we've made illegal immigration too easy and legal immigration too hard. We want to turn that around. So I think it's important that as we do this, that we start with the areas as to which there is the most broad-based bipartisan consensus. There is a lot of broad-based bipartisan consensus in both houses of Congress for more aggressive enforcement of the border, for updating and modernizing our legal immigration system, our visa programs, to make them more responsive to changing economic circumstances. There's also a lot of support for the idea that we need a functioning entry-exit system so that we can track immigrants. We know when and where they enter and when and where they leave, so that we know who's complying with their visa and who isn't. Once those things are in place, we'll be in a better position to deal in a humane fashion with the 11 million people who are already here. We want to treat them with dignity, compassion, and respect. And we can get there. But in order to know how to assess their needs and in order to give the American people the level of comfort that they need and that they justifiably demand, we need to do this in stages. That's why I've opposed the Gang of Eight bill, is because it attempts to wrap everything up into a tightly bound package of more than 1,000 pages. It tries to do too much all at once, and in the process of trying to do too much all at once, doesn't accomplish any of them as well as it should. I've been proposing amendments to that, first in the Judiciary Committee, and now that it's reaching the floor of the Senate, I'll be introducing more amendments in an effort to try to make this bill better. We have had a couple of votes this week to open the debate on this immigration bill, and we'll now be proceeding to it in the coming weeks so that we'll have more debate and discussion and more amendments on that bill.
Okay, great. We have a question on immigration coming from the phone from, looks like Julie in Springville. So Julie, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Senator Lee. Good to hear that you're there, and I'm really proud of your work. I'm very glad that you're from our state.
Thank you.
My question is, so where do you stand on getting the border successfully sealed before we talk about any kind of an amnesty for immigration?
Yeah, I'm a big believer, Julie, in the need to secure the border as a condition precedent to legalizing the 11 million people who are already here. In other words, that needs to occur in the proper sequence. We need to secure the border first. before we figure out what to do with the 11 million people. And that's for a whole variety of reasons, one of which has to do with the fact that not every one of the illegal aliens currently here necessarily wants to be here long term. A lot of these people are staying here year in and year out, not because they want to, but because they're afraid, in many cases correctly, that if they leave, they won't be able to get back in. If we update and modernize our legal immigration system, at the same time we secure our border, we'll be in a much better position to know how to deal with those who are here illegally, because not all of them necessarily need to be legalized in the same fashion that this bill proposes to do. So I wholeheartedly agree with you that we need to secure the border first before we go legalizing 11 million people, especially before putting them on a rather clear pathway to citizenship as this bill does.
Okay. Tonight we're going to try something a little bit different on the call, and that's to ask you some questions through some polls. The first poll question is, what is the most important issue facing the country today? So we'd love to get your take on that. The options are the economy and jobs, protecting Americans' constitutional rights, immigration, the budget and national debt, health care, and international threats such as terrorism. So again, it's the economy and jobs, protecting Americans' constitutional rights, immigration, the budget and national debt, health care, and international threats such as terrorism. So what do you think is the most important issue facing the country today? If you think it's if you think it's jobs and the economy, press 1. If it's protecting Americans' constitutional rights, press 2. If it's immigration, press 3. If it's the budget and national debt, press 4. For health care, press 5. And for international threats such as terrorism, press 6. So let's go to one of our questions that has been asked online. And it says, this is from Michael Woolsey. And he says, why does Congress have to solve the immigration problem with one massive 800-page bill?
Well, that's a great question, and to clarify, it's actually a bill that's now more than 1,000 pages. This has been one of my biggest criticisms of Senate Bill 744 from the very beginning, is that it's too big. It has become sort of the Obamacare of immigration. When you load this many things into one legislative package, there's a lot of junk that gets thrown in there. A lot of uncertainty and ambiguity gets thrown in there as well. When people talk about the fact that they want comprehensive immigration reform, some people have mistakenly concluded that that necessarily means they want this bill to pass. But the fact is that very few people have read this bill. Even many of the loudest, most vocal proponents of this bill have themselves never read it. If they had, they would discover a number of things, which include the fact that a lot of the promises that have been made by the bill's proponents are just not true. The bill's proponents have told us that illegal immigrants will be required to pay back taxes before they can get on the pathway to citizenship. When you read the fine print of the bill, you discover that all that means is that they have to pay any back taxes previously assessed by the IRS. But of course, the IRS isn't going to have occasion or even the ability to assess back taxes on anybody who has been working off the books, as illegal aliens generally do. So this is yet another example of how there's a lot of fine print in a 1,000-page long bill, fine print that causes a lot of problems, and that's one of the many reasons why I'm against it.
Okay. Just a reminder, if you have a question and you're on the phone, please press star 3. We're getting a lot of questions about immigration, so we're going to go to another one of those. We've got Joaquin in West Jordan. Joaquin, what's your question?
Senator, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Joaquin.
I think I spoke to you last time you had a town hall type meeting. My concern is that I've noticed Senator Rubio and Rand Paul, which were both Tea Party favorites, they seem to be gravitating, trying to push this immigration bill. I'm not exactly sure what happens in Washington, but it seems that he has a tendency to change politicians' minds. Can we count as your voters, those of us that voted for you to stand strong on your conviction, and also on your base, the people that voted for you, to stand for our principles and make sure that nothing gets passed on any bill that either we don't know about or where the devil's in the detail, which we all know that most bills that are usually suggested and pushed by liberal progressive Democrats usually do have devil in the details.
Yes, Joaquin, that does happen sometimes. Sometimes people change their minds after they get here. And there's a difference between changing your mind on a particular provision or deciding to adjust your stance just a little bit and forfeiting your principles. We can't forfeit the principles that we stand for without turning against what we believe in. And I certainly don't intend to do that. And I definitely don't intend to do that on this bill. I'm opposed to this bill for reasons that have to do with the basic principles that convinced me to get into the race for the U.S. Senate in 2010. And I also believe that this legislation would be bad. It would end up doing a lot more harm than good. I also think, Joaquin, that in this circumstance, the biggest single enemy to genuine, thorough immigration reform is this bill. If you want to reform the immigration system, then you should not want this bill. If you want to reform it, then you should advocate a step-by-step approach, one that proposes to fix the problem through a series of discrete, independent legislative proposals, one dealing with border security, one deal with visa modernization, perhaps another one dealing with an entry-exit system, and yet another one down the road, once those first few bills have been passed and implemented, dealing with the vexing problem of what to do with the 11 million people here. But to wrap all of them up into one and try to fix it all at once is not a good idea. It's going to end well, and it's going to end most likely in none of those things getting accomplished very well. Importantly, Joaquin, we've also been told that the Gang of Eight bill proposed in the Senate, assuming it passes in the Senate, will be essentially dead on arrival in the House of Representatives.
Thanks, Joaquin.
Can I ask you another question, Senator?
Sure, go ahead.
I remember reading an article about, this is not probably not about you, maybe you can explain it to me, because I know you probably conversed with Senator Hatch, where he was proposing a bill where either we allow to or we allow for educated or trained immigrants to come to this country to fill jobs opening for certain companies or corporations. I asked Senator Hatch to try to explain to me the logic. I have relatives, family, son-in-laws that have college degrees and they still haven't been able to find jobs. How is it possible we're going to bring immigrants to take the jobs when we still have our own American citizens that can't even find jobs?
Yeah, Joaquin, I'm not sure what article you're referring to or what legislative proposal you're describing. There are some proposals out there that deal with trying to attract science, technology, engineering, and mathematics students to the United States because we're not graduating nearly enough people in those fields, and we're not producing enough of them to fill job slots here in the United States. That might have been what he was talking about. I do support that provision, but I'm not sure whether that's what you're referring to.
Okay, thank you, Joaquin. Just a reminder, if you're on the phone and you have a question for Senator Lee, please press *3. I wanted to jump back to the poll really quickly so we can make sure that everyone that wants to weigh in can. The question we're asking you is, what is the most important issue facing the country today? For jobs in the economy, press 1. Protecting Americans' constitutional rights, press 2. For immigration, press 3. For budget and national debt, press 4. For healthcare, press 5. And for international threats such as terrorism, press 6. Let's jump to one of our crowd hall questions. This question says, do you believe that public awareness of the NSA phone and internet spying scandal will prompt real changes to protect the Fourth Amendment?
I suspect that it will. For the last 2.5 years since I've been serving in the United States Senate, I've raised concerns with regard to some provisions of the Patriot Act and some provisions of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Because these provisions of law I've argued for the last 2.5 years, have the potential to be abused in such a way that they could result in the deprivation of privacy from the American people. And the government could manipulate information that it obtains, and that information could be used for nefarious purposes, sometimes to manipulate the political system, otherwise to harass and intimidate individual Americans. And we don't have to speculate that the government is doing that now, or that the government is actively engaging in political manipulation, using information that it gains through this information now. We don't have to assume that. We don't have to speculate on that point. What we do know is that eventually it will be abused, as long as our laws are written too broadly to give the government too much power. So what I've tried to do is limit the power of government to spy on its own citizens. I've introduced legislation, a lot of bipartisan legislation, one with Senator Merkley, a Democrat from Oregon, that would make it so that the FISA court, wherever possible, has to issue its legal findings in a public forum. And where necessary to protect national security, it can issue a summary, but it needs to issue some kind of legal analysis wherever it can. In other circumstances, I've worked with Senator Ron Wyden, also a Democrat, to introduce legislation that would make it so the NSA can't access data that it collects on U.S. citizens without first getting a court warrant, that it can't search through data that it has gathered. It shouldn't be able to do that without a warrant based on probable cause consistent with the Fourth Amendment. So yeah, I think recent events have caused a lot of Americans to realize that these threats are real, to realize that the government does have a lot of power, that we've perhaps given it too much power, and we need to rein it in. So in answer to the question, I think there's a good chance that legislative proposals like those that I've just described will in fact have that effect.
Okay. Let's go to a question in Holiday. Connie there has a question about what it means to secure the border. So Connie, go ahead.
Oh, hi. This is Connie in Holiday, and I know that you're saying that one of the first steps is to secure the border. When will we know that it's secure so we can move to the next step? Or is this just a delaying tactic?
No, Connie, it's certainly not a delaying tactic. This is something that's important to all Americans. One of the ways that we monitor that is by border flow, by the number of people that we're apprehending or observing crossing the border illegally. And we can follow a lot of those metrics. The metrics are sometimes difficult to track, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. It certainly doesn't mean that we don't have to do it. In my mind, Connie, the single best way to verify that the border is adequately secure is by requiring another vote of members of Congress. We can certainly set up the metrics any way we want, specifying that illegal border crossings have to be down by 90% within 5 years, for example. But regardless of what metric we use, we need a subsequent act of Congress. We need both houses of Congress to act and to say, yes, the border is secure, as a condition that precedes and triggers the legalization process, any legalization process that we adopt. So in an effort to make the Gang of Eight bill better, I proposed an amendment in committee, Lee Amendment number 4, which would have said that we're not going to start legalizing any illegal aliens until, at a minimum, Congress has had a chance to vote on that. And it was held up, it was shot down, because the Gang of Eight opposed it on grounds that they couldn't trust that the House of Representatives would vote the right way, the way that they wanted them to vote. I think that's sad. They're basically saying they don't trust the democratic process. They don't trust the people's elected representatives to make that judgment call, and I think that's a mistake. So Connie, in answer to your question, I think regardless of what metric we use, that finding needs to be made by Congress, and it needs to not be outsourced, as the current bill does, to the Secretary of Homeland Security, who herself does not stand for election.
Okay, great. Let's take another call on immigration from Stanford in Hiram. He'd like to ask about green cards related to agriculture. So Stanford, you're on the line?
Yes. Yes, hello, Senator.
Hello, Stanford.
My question is regarding the importance that a lot of workers that are needed in agriculture, and yet there's no real way to get them here. There used to be an old, what was called Bracero program that had some success, but then was shut down for various reasons. But I just wondered, rather than the idea that there has to be a route to citizenship, a lot of these workers simply want to be able to come and work and go back home. How about the idea of emphasizing a green card or temporary resident card or special visa that would allow them to come in with proper identification and so on, or even those that are here illegally would be able to apply for this, but they would not be able to vote. They could pay taxes, maybe even get emergency health care, but this would make it so that necessarily you wouldn't even have to have the border security complete. What you do is you just have to make sure that those that are here have the proper visa, green card, whatever.
Stanford, thank you for asking. Thank you for asking that question. I think that raises a very relevant point, and one that came up during the Judiciary Committee markup of this bill. My friend and colleague Ted Cruz, the new senator from Texas, introduced a bill that would have essentially done that would have left the bill otherwise intact, but would have prevented those who are currently illegally in the country from attaining citizenship at the end of this path, recognizing that there ought to be some distinction between those who come here legally and those who come here illegally, and that the prize for coming here illegally ought not necessarily culminate in citizenship and in the corresponding right to vote. I think there is a very credible argument to be made in that regard, and I supported Senator Cruz in that amendment. Here again, the amendment failed. It failed without much discussion because the Gang of Eight opposed it, and a lot of people just sort of took it on faith that if you're going to legalize them at some point, you have to do it now, and you also have to put them on a pathway toward eventual citizenship now. To my mind, nobody's ever made a compelling argument as to why that is the case, especially considering that a lot of these people don't necessarily insist upon citizenship. In many cases, they might not want it. I don't know. That's not necessarily for us to decide. But there are a lot of people, Stanford, who feel just the way you do, who say that regardless of what we do for them or what allowances we make for them, we ought not be making them citizens. And I think there is a very strong argument that can be made in that regard, and that's why I support Senator Cruz's amendment. I suspect he'll run it again on the floor, and we'll see what happens there. But thank you for bringing that up.
Okay. Let's take a little break and do another poll question. It's clear that immigration is on our callers' minds tonight, so we'd love to get your take on what's going on with the immigration bill. So on immigration, what do you think Washington should do? Do you think Washington should pass reform in one large bill that covers every issue? Or do you think Washington should pass reform in a step-by-step approach, starting with border security? So again, would you like Washington to pass reform in one large bill covering every issue? Or would you prefer that Washington pass reform in a step-by-step approach, starting with border security? If you'd like them to pass reform in one large bill covering every issue, press 1. If you'd like them to pass reform in a step-by-step approach, please press 2. Let's see, it looks like we have another call regarding what immigration amendments you plan to propose, and this is coming from Kimberly in Moab. So Kimberly, you're on the line.
Hi, Senator Lee. How are you?
Just fine, Kimberly. Thank you.
Hi. I just have a question about the amendments you're proposing. I don't know how many you're proposing, but could you explain what you're proposing to amend this bill with and what it would do to the bill and also the probability of the bill being amended, your proposals being accepted? And I also have a question about the gun treaty that's been ratified. Could you explain that also while you're talking?
Sure. Okay, so let's start with the first question first about my amendments. I've proposed about 11 or 12 amendments in this round of amendments that are going to be introduced on the floor. I introduced a couple of dozen when it was going through committee, and now we go through a separate round of it, and I think I've introduced 11 or 12. I'll go through some of the more important ones, so one of them which I've already mentioned, saying that Congress should have to vote on opening the legalization pathway to current illegal aliens. In other words, once the Secretary of Homeland Security makes a report and makes recommendations, comes up with a strategy for border security, Congress ought to have to vote on whether or not that strategy is adequate to do the job, and we shouldn't be legalizing people until that vote occurs. Another one would require more realistic demands to be made of illegal aliens in order to establish that they've paid taxes that they owe, because as I mentioned a minute ago, although we've been promised by the Gang of Eight ever since this bill was introduced that illegal aliens would have to pay back taxes, when you read the fine print you discover it doesn't really require that. It just requires that they pay any taxes previously assessed by the IRS. So this one would require them to come up with an estimate of what they owe and then demonstrate that they've paid it. I've got another amendment that would require a series of reports to be produced about what benefits that illegal aliens and others who fit into this RPI status, the provisional immigrant status, might be receiving as they're going through the legalization process. I've got another one that corresponds to legislation Rob Bishop has introduced in the House of Representatives that would make it possible for Border Patrol agents to enforce the law, the immigration laws that we have in this country, even on federal public land, notwithstanding environmental protections on that land. One of the things that is interesting that we've discovered is that a lot of the worst illegal immigration areas, a lot of the areas through which more illegal immigrants are passing than any other, are those areas where there's a lot of federal public land along the border. And in a lot of those areas, for environmental reasons, our Border Patrol agents are being told you can't enforce the law on that land. We're talking about miles and miles of public land where they can't do their job. So this would open those areas up and say that, yeah, you can enforce the law there. So those are a small handful of the amendments that I've introduced and that I'll be running. It is really, really difficult for me to predict how likely any one of these is to pass. I will say, though, that each of these is a rather substantive amendment, and the very substantive amendments, those that make significant changes to it, have been opposed by the Gang of Eight, and so far, basically anything that's been opposed by the Gang of Eight has been shot down. They've got a strong lock on this. At this point, I think it's somewhat likely that this bill is going to pass the Senate. I think it's equally certain, probably even more certain, that it will not pass the House of Representatives. You asked also a second question about the Small Arms Treaty. You asked what I could tell you about the Small Arms Treaty that was ratified. Nothing has been ratified. There is a Small Arms Treaty that, as I understand it, if ratified, could tend to undermine the rights of individual Americans to own, bear, and use firearms in this country, thus eroding Second Amendment rights. It has not been ratified. I will work tirelessly to block its ratification, and I will be shocked if it is ratified.
Okay, and if you'd like to see a full list of Senator Lee's amendments to the immigration bill, you can check those at lee.senate.gov. Click on the Press Office tab and go to the blog section. It should be the blog on the very top. Our next question comes from Cottonwood Heights, which is where I used to live. Sharon has a question about the immigration bill as well. Sharon, you're on the line.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and if the Gang of Eight plan does pass the Senate, and if it's dead on arrival at the House, is this the Obama administration plan so that when the 2014 vote comes up, the Democrats can blame the Republican House for the failing, and then in that way they can hope to take over the House in 2014. Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because since we can't trust the present administration, since they've lied so much and are not holding to the Constitution, it just makes me wonder if this is all a ploy to do this, just so that the public thinks that the Senate is doing what they're supposed to do, and the House is making it fail.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Sharon. Some have suggested that is, in fact, the strategy. I obviously can't know what President Obama has in mind, and I generally try to not speak for what someone else thinks, because I don't have that ability to know what someone else is thinking. Let me just say this, though, Sharon. If that is the president's strategy, I think it's a bad one, because I don't think that bringing forward immigration legislation, having it pass the Senate and fail in the House, is going to give the president a lot of momentum, or even any momentum, toward somehow winning back the House of Representatives in 2014. In the first place, I don't think it's a big enough issue. I don't think it's high enough on the radar screen for most American voters to have that effect. And in any event, I think that the president, if this is his strategy, is overestimating the extent to which this would be a really popular strategy, one that could swing things the other way. It's also important to remember that in 2014, Obamacare is scheduled to kick in. This bill is becoming less popular by the day, by the hour, by the minute, and by the second. And it's only going to get worse from there once it actually kicks in. So by 2014, Americans are going to have a lot of additional things to worry about, and I think there are a lot more reasons why the president, if this is his strategy, is very unlikely to have his party take over the House of Representatives in the 2014 midterm elections.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. If you're on the phone and you would like to ask a question to Senator Lee, please press *3. And let's jump back to our poll question really quickly. We'd like to get your take on what's going on with the immigration reform. So, do you think Washington should, 1, pass reform in one large bill covering every issue, or 2, pass reform in a step-by-step approach starting with border security? So again, that's 1, pass reform in one large bill covering every issue, or 2, press step-by-step reform starting with border security. Let's take one of our online questions. This is coming from another Sharon, and she's asking, is there any possibility that the immigration bill will be split into separate bills, one for border security, one dealing with illegal immigration?
That is exactly what I would like to see. I'd like to see it be split up into several bills, perhaps 2, maybe 3 or 4. And I think it would be much better that way. I think the odds of us getting real immigration reform passed this year would go way, way up if they did that. A lot of people have asked, why does this have to be contentious? Why does it have to be so controversial? Why can't the parties just get along? And the answer to that question is because we've insisted on packaging everything up together. There is broad bipartisan consensus in both houses of Congress for border security and for visa modernization. We had to start there. We had to start by enacting those things as to which there's the most broad-based bipartisan consensus. That's where we ought to start. As far as what the odds are, your question goes to what the odds are of that happening. In the Senate right now, the odds of that are very low. In fact, they're practically zero, because the Gang of Eight, for whatever reason, has been given tremendous control by a lot of people in both political parties. I think that's a big mistake, because we've given them the power to lump everything in together and hold all of it hostage, so that, or in hopes that we will grant this pathway to citizenship to those who are currently in the country illegally. That's a big mistake. After this likely passes the Senate, and after it almost certainly fails in the House, then we could be faced with a different set of circumstances altogether. I think that presenting this as multiple pieces of legislation is exactly what the House is most likely to do. In fact, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Representative Bob Goodlatte, has suggested that that's exactly what he intends to do. So I think the chances of that happening over in the House are much higher, And I hope that once the House passes legislation in that format, we'll take up that legislation over here.
Okay. We've closed out our poll on immigration, and so we'd like to share those results with those of you on the call and with you, Senator Lee. It looks like 91% of our callers tonight want Washington to pass reform in a step-by-step approach, starting with border security. 91%. Does that surprise you, Senator Lee?
Well, I'm thrilled to see that it's that high. I think this is great. This is a message that I've been speaking on for many months, and I'm glad to see that many Utahns agree with me. So thanks for your participation on this.
Great. Let's jump to another one of our Crowd Hall questions. Again, Crowd Hall is an online tool that we've used throughout the week to collect questions from those online. For future town hall meetings, you can get information on that from Senator Lee's Facebook page. This question says, according to CBO data, we had 35% more illegal immigrants in 2011 than in 2000. Why not secure the border before legalizing?
Well, I think we should. I think it's a big mistake to go legalizing 11 million people before the border is secure. You've got to stop the flow of illegal immigration before you go and legalize all of them. I think we're only going to make the problem worse. We're only going to encourage more illegal immigration in the future if we tell people yet again, just as we did in 1986, look, come on in, as long as you make it across the border, break our laws, we'll eventually make you citizens anyway. This will just encourage more of that behavior. We've got to solve the underlying problem before we go legalizing them and turning them into eventual citizens.
Okay. If you're on the line and you'd like to ask Senator Lee a question, please press *3. We're going to take another one of our online callers. This one's coming from Monique in Clearfield. Monique, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Hi, Senator Lee.
Hello.
I do have a question about the immigration reform bill. There's a lot of discussion about how we're going to legalize the illegal aliens that are already here, and also about securing the border. But I'm not hearing any verbiage on what's going to happen to those people that actually do cross. Not everybody comes through the actual border areas. They're sneaking in across areas that aren't being patrolled. And when they are captured, they're usually held for a while and just sent back. So it's just like herding sheep through a hole in a fence. So there's no real punishment for their coming into our country illegally.
Yes, okay, so this is an important point. We do have laws against this. It's a felony offense once you've been deported once, and if you're caught re-entering the country illegally, without permission, without a visa, that's a felony. And we do tend to imprison those people. When I was a federal prosecutor years ago, I used to prosecute people for this all the time, for illegal re-entry as a previously deported alien. So that's one way that we combat it. And I know that we continue to prosecute those people who do that at a pretty healthy pace. It's interesting to point out, though, that under the Gang of Eight bill, you might find this stunning, because I certainly did when I first saw it. Many of those people will be eligible for citizenship. Not just legalization, but eventual citizenship. The bill makes it possible for some people who, having previously been deported, then attempted to re-enter and thereby committed a felony, some of those same people will eventually become eligible for citizenship under this bill. And I think that's a huge problem, because it helps encourage more of the same problem that you've been describing. So yet another reason why we've got to secure the border first.
Okay, I think these poll questions are really helpful, so we're going to jump back to the one that we asked earlier to make sure that we get as many of your answers as possible. The question was, what is the most important issue facing the country today? For jobs in the economy, press 1. For protecting Americans' constitutional rights, press 2. For immigration, press 3. For budget and national debt, press 4. For health care, press 5. And for international threats such as terrorism, press 6. Let's jump to a question from Ogden. It looks like Jeff has a question about what it means to secure the border. So Jeff, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Hi, Senator. I just, first of all, want to come clean. I'm a Democrat. but I appreciate that you're taking people's calls and speaking with them about the issues that concern our state and our country. I would like to know specifically what you propose as a way to secure the border. I don't think that building a wall across the entire border is a realistic approach. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I would also like to know what your feelings are regarding the so-called DREAM Act immigrants.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. First of all, I welcome a broad base of people participating in these calls, so it's good to have you on board. You certainly don't need to apologize to me for being a Democrat. I have a lot of good friends who are Democrats. In fact, I have two cousins who are Democrats who serve in the United States Senate. I'm not sure how we all ended up here. I think it's a genetic defect that caused us to come to the U.S. Senate. Anyway, it's great to have you on the call. Okay, as far as securing the border, I completely agree with you. A single contiguous fence going along the entire stretch of the border isn't necessarily the way to go, in part because in some areas building a fence is unnecessary and in other areas it's impractical. There are some areas, for example, along the area surrounding the Big Bend National Park in Texas, right along the Rio Grande. There are some huge cliffs there that serve as a great natural barrier. There's no real reason to build a fence. In other areas where there's a lot of opportunity for illegal border crossing, and in some of the urban areas, we do need a fence, and we already have one. But you have to make a judgment call based on changing circumstances, based on geography, and based on illegal immigration flows, where you need a fence and where you don't need a fence. There's also a judgment that has to be made about how you space out Border Patrol agents and what you allow them to do. I mentioned earlier the fact that we've been prohibiting a lot of these agents from doing their jobs effectively by telling them that they can't do their jobs on certain federal lands because we've been very worried about the environmental ramifications of it. I understand that there is some land that needs to be protected, and yet I don't see the harm that can come from allowing a few Border Patrol agents to walk across the land, or in some cases drive across it, so that they can do their job and protect our national security in the process. So in addition to this, aerial surveillance is also helpful. We've got aircraft, including some unmanned aerial aircraft, that can be useful in monitoring the border, in seeing where there are crossings, either across a river or across the land, where there are tunnel crossings. It's a combination of all of these things. But I completely agree with you. It's not necessarily practical or cost effective to just say we're going to build a single fence or a single wall all across the southern border. It doesn't necessarily work that way, and in some areas it's completely unnecessary.
Okay. Shifting gears just a little bit, we're going to take a call from Karen and Sandy, who has a question about constitutional rights. So Karen, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Hi, Senator.
Hello.
My question is, what can I, as a regular citizen, I'm concerned about our constitutional rights being eroded, what can I do to help protect them?
Well, Karen, first of all, the fact that you're even asking the question, the fact that you're thinking about it is fantastic. We need more people just like you who are willing to do that. And we need you to talk to your friends and your neighbors, your children, your aunts and uncles, co-workers, anyone who will listen to you about your concerns. Read the Constitution. Read it with your friends and your neighbors and your aunts and uncles and cousins and co-workers. Talk to people about their rights. You know, sometimes people don't talk about them, they don't defend them because they're not aware of them. And yet the Constitution's written in pretty simple words. And the Bill of Rights in particular is very simple. You can read through the first 10 amendments of the Constitution in about 2.5 minutes. So read through those, talk about them with those around you, communicate with your elected representatives just as you're doing it now, and you'll be amazed at how much good that will do. The advent of social media is another big tool in this direction. Never has it been so easy for so few people with so little money to communicate a message so broadly. And so if you're If you're on Facebook or Twitter or any other social media site, you can communicate with a lot of people to express your concerns about the fact that your government might be spying on you or lying to you or targeting you or doing something else that it shouldn't be doing. The more that people talk about this, the less that government can get away with mischief. And this is an issue that is neither Democratic nor Republican. It's neither liberal nor conservative. It's simply American. And I thank you, Karen, for caring about it.
And Karen is clearly not the only one on the call tonight who's concerned about constitutional rights. I want to take a look at the poll results. And again, there were 6 categories that we asked you about where your concerns, the most important things going on in the country today. Those were jobs and the economy, protecting Americans' constitutional rights, immigration, budget and national debt, healthcare, and international threats. And it looks like 54% of our respondents said that protecting Americans' constitutional rights was their biggest concern. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's it's certainly very interesting, and it's encouraging that many people in Utah are concerned about this issue. The events of the last few weeks have taught us that we ought to be concerned when your government is lying to you or spying on you or targeting you. When the government is doing these things, it causes us to question whether it's such a good idea to have a government, especially a national government that's so big and that's so expensive and so intrusive. And that causes us in turn to reflect back upon that founding document that provides the rule book, the basic rules for the operation of our national government. And people are realizing that the government doesn't have any business doing a lot of these things. We need to rein it in. We need to protect ourselves by limiting the power of government. In other words, it's not just that we need to make sure that the government runs better. There are certain powers that we should never give to government in the first place because so many of those powers can be so easily abused. We need to protect against that, and the way we do that is by adopting constitutional rights and by vigorously protecting those rights and asserting them whenever they come up.
Okay, we just have time for a few more questions, so if you have one, make sure to press *3 to get yours in. Let's go to Tyson, who's asked a question online, is wondering, is there a chance that the Senate Bill 744 can be stopped? I think he's referring to the Gang of 8 immigration bill. Yeah,
so look, the Gang of 8 bill, Senate Bill 744, can be stopped. This is by no means a fait accompli. I don't think that any of us need to just fall back on this and say there's nothing we can do about it. I do think at this point it appears likely that it's going to pass the Senate, but even that's not certain. If enough people express enough concerns with it, it'll be stopped even in the Senate. But even if it does pass the Senate, I think it's more likely than not that it will be stopped in the House of Representatives. Bob Goodlatte, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, has already pronounced it basically dead on arrival. What we do need to explain is what we're for, not just what we're against, the Gang of 8 bill, but what we're for. What I'm for is for broad-based, bipartisan consensus on aggressive immigration reform that needs to start with robust border security enhancement, that needs to include a very strong effort to expand our existing visa programs to make them more responsive to changing economic circumstances. And once those basic building blocks are in place, we'll be in a much better position to figure out what to do with the 11 million people who are already here illegally.
Okay. Unfortunately, it looks like that's all the time we have tonight for questions. If you have a question for Senator Lee that we weren't able to get to, please stay on the line and leave a voice message, and someone from our staff will get back to you. We received a lot of questions tonight on immigration, and so if you'd like more information on where Senator Lee stands, please visit his website at lee.senate.gov, where we have his op-eds that he's penned. He's got 3 in Deseret News. Visit YouTube. His YouTube channel is YouTube/Senator Mike Lee. He's got a number of floor speeches, so there's lots of content online to give you all the information you need about where Senator Lee stands. So Senator Lee, I'll turn it over to you to close things up.
We're a great nation, not because of who we are, but because of what we do. And what we do in this country is we welcome immigrants. We provide a great place for them to live. That's why we're the greatest nation on earth, is because people want to come here because of the American dream that everyone can realize. That dream would be jeopardized if we opened the doors and if we allowed just anyone in anytime without looking out for our national security. And that dream would also be jeopardized if we stopped enforcing the rule of law, if we lost sight of the fact that we need to continue to be a nation of laws. You see, that's one of the reasons why people want to come here, is because they see that we have laws and we enforce them. We have order in this country, and we do things in the proper sequence. We are a nation of immigrants. We always have been. I hope we always will be. And it's because of that that I can't support the Gang of Eight bill. If you agree with me, if these arguments resonate with you, then I invite you to join me in this cause, to help expand this dialogue. Help me engage in a dialogue with your fellow Utahns and your fellow Americans, and help me bring about lasting immigration reform that is both comprehensive and follows the proper sequence so that we can actually get this thing done. If we work together, we can get this thing done, and we can get it done in a broad-based, bipartisan fashion. That's my hope, that's my dream, and together that's what we'll accomplish.